Welcome to Saturdays with Mark and Tony, featuring Mark Lowry and Tony Campolo. Now, here are Mark and Tony.
You know, it's interesting to note, a lot of people don't realize this, but the Bill of Rights, which separates church and state, it supposedly establishes a wall between church and state, guaranteeing separation of church and state in simple language, was this, that the federal government should not make any law prohibiting establishing any religion as the state religion. However, it did not protect individual states from doing it. Right. And so the state of Massachusetts, for instance, had Congregationalism as the state religion until well into the 1800s. And the state of Virginia had the Anglican Church, or the Episcopal Church, as the state religion up until the 1800s. So we didn't have separation of church and state in every state just because the federal Constitution said the federal government cannot establish a national religion. It did not prohibit individual states from establishing religions, and it remained for the future for those states to get. And Roger Williams was one of the voices that stood up and said every state should do what has been done in the federal Constitution. I thought you ought to know that.
I'm surprised. You know, somebody needs to do a movie of the week or something about Roger Williams.
Oh yeah,
he's a fascinating character, and
he's a Baptist.
He's a Baptist,
and of course, Peggy and I, my wife and I, belong to what we call the Roger Williams Fellowship, because what happens is that Roger Williams and the whole Baptist tradition believed that it was up to the local church to determine what people could or could not believe. The theologies, belief systems were developed by local churches, the people coming together, praying together, studying the scripture together. And there are tendencies in major denominations that are Baptist. My own denomination, the American Baptist, and the Southern Baptist Convention, to say, okay, the denomination is going to make a ruling on something like homosexuality, and that's going to be applicable to every church in the denomination. Roger Williams would go ballistic over that, saying no hierarchical organization has the right to determine what a local church.
But I thought Baptist meant that the individual is autonomous, not just the church.
That's another doctrine. It's called soul freedom or soul conscience. That the church, not only does a local congregation have the right to decide who can and who cannot be members of the church. That's what the local congregation can decide. Right. But according to true Baptist doctrine, the church cannot tell the individual what to believe. Right. That in fact each individual needs to search the scripture under the guidance of
that's what Jesus said. He said, "You're all classmates. You have one teacher."
I don't quite go along with that Baptist doctrine, though.
Well, Jesus said it. Argue with him, buddy. He said, "You're all classmates. You have one life leader, and that is Christ. You go to him for your information." But he forgot to tell us about the class bullies.
Yeah.
And there are some class bullies out there that want to tell us what we can think. And you know, when I stand before God one day, I'm not going to say, "Hey, Tony, come over and explain to him why I thought that."
Yeah.
I'm going to be autonomous. I'm going to be giving an account for what I thought.
Yeah, here's the other side of the story. John Wesley, you know who he is, the guy that started the Methodist movement. Yeah. He said, when interpreting Scripture, there are certain principles you have to apply. He called it quadrilateral. Here are the principles. First, when you read the Scripture, you have to be asking yourself, as much as possible, and this is where scholarship comes in, what did the people to whom it was written 2,000 years ago understand when they read this Scripture? That's the first principle. The second principle is be reasonable. Use reason. What does your own reasonable evaluation of the situation require in the way of interpretation? Second force to be brought into consideration. The third, and this is where Protestants really chafe at the bit, John Wesley said, you have to take into consideration the traditions of the church. What he meant by that is, you just didn't start interpreting the Scripture and make it all. The church has been around for 2,000 years. How the great church leaders down through the ages read the Scripture and understood what it had to say. What is the tradition of the church? The fourth thing, and this is most important, is that you must always bring your own interpretation back to the community of believers and say, this is what reason, tradition, and my studies have led me to believe. What do you think about that? and to be subject to the judgment of your local congregation. So what the Christian faith is against, and this is strange for Americans, is we're against it. The Bible's against individualism. It's against individuals making up their own mind and coming to their own conclusions. You've got to, in fact, see what the traditions of the church are. You have to study Scripture. You have to use your reason. And you have to come back and talk to your other brothers and sisters. Private explanations as to what the Bible is all about have to be called into question, because individuals can read the Bible and go off in 100 different directions.
Well, don't we get our, the tradition of a pastor?
Well, yeah, because Christianity is about community.
Yeah, did you hear that?
What?
Go ahead, say it to him.
About community.
It's about community.
It's about community. Yeah. It's putting the community
above the tradition of the preacher standing up and feeding everybody from the Catholics. In the early church, wait, hold on. In the early church, they had home churches, and they would discuss scriptures. It wasn't one guy chewing the food and spitting it in your mouth. It was everybody wrestling and talking, right? In the original. Yeah.
Well, if you go to the
yes, Mark.
Yes, Mark, you're right. You're right.
Well, wait a minute. You're going to blame that on the Catholics?
No, but I heard that's where it came from, where they start telling us what to think, and and the preacher stands and preaches, but no one ever says, "Okay, here's what I'm thinking." And challenges him, and they discuss it.
There's supposed to be that kind of relationship. They're supposed, the Catholics are given this great judgment that they speak when the Pope speaks, he speaks ex cathedra. That is infallible. If you study what the doctrine really is, it's this. When the Pope expresses the mind of the church, then he is speaking ex cathedra. In other words, the Pope doesn't have the right to simply say, I just thought up something. This is now the doctrine that all Catholics must believe. What he must do is say, call the cardinals together and say, what are you hearing from the local congregations on this doctrine? What are the people saying? My job is to be the mouthpiece for the church, not to tell the church what to believe, but to express to the world what the church in general believes. Is that not a fair statement?
Yeah.
I thought you want to know that, Mark.
I still say I'm right.
But does it happen that way?
It doesn't happen that way.
But wouldn't it be cool? I was at a home church not long ago, Barry Jennings and Suzette, and it was the most incredible experience. Because actually, one of their kids gave the sermon that night, and it was like I was hearing from God. I mean, it was something about fear. It was about his whole sermon. He'd been watching a Star Wars movie, and he showed a clip of that where Yoda's explaining to the young kid about fear. And then he found scriptures to go with this. A 12-year-old kid doing this. And then the adults, they're respecting this child's input. Everybody's adding to it. It felt like a family of God to me. And there's probably 5, 6 people there. And I think originally that's why the church was in homes, because they could be under the radar. When governments were hostile to the church, they could still carry on because they're under the radar, as opposed to this big...
You know, we have all these big church buildings, and you say, well, you need the church buildings. May I point out that for 275 years, there wasn't a single church building in the world.
No, I just pointed that out, and you're picking it up. So may you not point it out after I just pointed it out.
You're both right.
Thank you.
Saturdays with Mark and Tony is a presentation of marklowry.com.